for friends to last a lifetime, professors who broaden your perspective, and the skills and education for future success in a safe, small-town environment. Pioneer your future at Glenville State College.
And the truth is, this job here didn't get in my way of music much. I could just go down there,
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Robert F. Kidd Library. This is our second reading event of the Little Kanawha Reading Series for the semester. And we have a very, very delightful program here today for you. We have the renowned Mack Samples. He's a local musician. He's worked actually at Glenville State College for over 20 years as a registrar and the director of admissions. He's worked at the WVU Extension Agency in Legg County. Actually started his career teaching classes at the Lancaster Regional Campus of the University of South Carolina. And I didn't know for sure whether he's going to have some guests with him today, but he's brought Dr. David Odell and Mr. Buddy Griffin with him also, and I think they're going to help him out a little bit with his presentation, and it's just going to be delightful. So I wanted to mention also that there's a little bit of food and some drinks in the back if anybody's hungry or thirsty, so they can grab some things at any time. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Mack Samples to the podium.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say, first of all, I'm delighted to be at Glenville State College because this is where my heart has always been. I went to school here in the early 60s, fell in love with the place, found my wife here. I mean, this place means a lot to me, so I'm very glad to be here. And always glad to have an opportunity to talk about my books. And as the article said that circulated about my coming, I'm probably better known in West Virginia as a musician than I am a writer. But the books have been very good to me. Haven't made me rich or anything, but they've been very good to me. So I'm going to spend some time talking about the books. And I have done, over the past 20 years, I've done all kinds of presentations similar to this one that I'm going to do tonight, but I've never had sound effects before, like I got tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. But Jason Gill and I were talking about it, and I said, you got two of West Virginia's premier musicians here in this area. Why not use them? Because my books are very steeped in music. So that it'll be handy to kind of break the monotony and have a tune or two out of them. And so I'd like to start my presentation by saying, why did I write a book? What inspired me to write my first book? And I'm going to hold my first book up here. And this first book I called Doodlebug, Doodlebug, Your House is on Fire. And since I was totally unknown in the world of writing, I couldn't get anybody to publish it. So I had to publish it myself, put it all together and do the whole thing myself. And the first thing I learned was that's a terrible cover. I mean, you can't read it. It's gold on red. And I regretted it as soon as it came. But I don't know if you ever heard of a book called Catcher in the Rye or not, J.D. Salinger's book, but it had gold on red, but you can read it. I don't know what the difference was. But to make a long story short, I had to publish it. It cost a lot of money at the time. No publisher was interested, so I went to McLean Printing up in Parsons, West Virginia, and they charged me $4.85 a copy, and they wouldn't print less than 1,000. So it was going to cost me about $5,000 to get it printed. At that time, that was not pocket change for me. But I went ahead and gulped and did it. And took a chance. Hoping maybe I'd sell enough to pay for it. But as it turned out, I sold all 1,000 of them in about 10 or 11 months, thereabouts. And I was kind of astounded at how quickly they sold. And I don't know, probably wore myself out going around promoting the book. But I made a very good connection, which I want to tell you about. There was a guy in Charleston at the time named Bill Clements, and he was not a publisher at the time. He just had a job replaced there where he sold West Virginia books. And he sold a bunch of these books for me. And he and I had the beginning of a very good relationship for the past 20 years as a result of this book. But anyway, I want to show you what happened to this book. This was my first copy, and it sold so well, I had to do a reprint, or I wanted to do a reprint, and I found this place in Charleston, I forget, Mountain State Press, I think it is, and I had to pay for it again. It wasn't a publisher, But anyway, he put this cover on it, which I didn't like. But I sold a bunch of them sold them all, the ones I got. And it's the same story, just a different cover. And then, by that time, the man I was telling you about, Bill Clements, had a publishing firm in Charleston. He was publishing books. So he took it the third time and did a much more professional job, as you can see. And the book came out in 1994, and just for your information, it still sells to this day. Clements sells them Tamarack all the time, and I hadn't thought about the book for a while. I walked in Tamarack about 2 years ago, and here it was up on a pedestal back in the book place. So it still sells. Well, what kind of a book is it? For lack of a better description, I would call it a coming-of-age book. It's about a teenager in the 1950s. Now, I guess I have to say, I'm going to read you what the publisher's critic wrote about it when the book came out the last time. I had a blob on the back that I wrote, but I thought this guy nailed it pretty well, who reviewed the book and did this for the publisher. And I'm going to read it to you. It says, Doodlebug, Doodlebug, Your House is on Fire is a classic coming-of-age novel. It portrays eccentric and sturdy characters that will stick with you long after you put the book away. Set in the mid-1950s, Doodlebug is a story of 17-year-old Corley Malone when the materially modest but spiritual rich ways of life in rural West Virginia are being replaced by, he has in parentheses, progress. Such things as swimming holes, summer camp fishing, one-room schools, satisfaction from working hard are rapidly disappearing. But Samples is no mushy romantic. Corley, the character, also raises hell on back roads and beer joints. Corley is innocently profane and profanely innocent, and it is in this seamless integration that gives the book its unique flavor. He has annexed provide doses of laugh-out-loud humor, and I haven't even told you about the dynamite yet. And that's the kind of thing that the book is about. And one of the reasons I was inspired to write this book is every book I ever picked up when I was looking in bookstores about West Virginia was always about coal. Coal camp life, the struggles of coal miners, and that's all fine, it's true. But I want to write a book about rural West Virginia that had absolutely nothing to do with coal mining. And that's what it is. Now, were there any coal mines where I grew up? There were a few of what we call wildcat mines, where some guy had a hole in the hill and maybe worked 5 or 6 guys. And they maybe had one truck. You had a little bit of that. But mining was not the main occupation of anybody I knew. I didn't know anybody that dug coal. What did people do? Well, this is the beauty of the book. A lot of times, I lived 30 miles from Charleston in the rural area, and people worked at Carbide Chemicals, DuPont Chemicals in Charleston and drove. A lot of people worked for the natural gas industry, which my dad did, and a lot of my relatives did, but there was nothing to do with coal whatsoever. And I never saw anybody with coal on their face coming from work at all where I grew up. And I grew up in a very rural area, and I grew up in a clan, which was very typical of where I grew up. The old man came back in the mid-1800s, 70 or 80, homesteaded, had a big bunch of land, and when his kids grew up, he gave them a slice of the land. They all lived around it. And that's nothing untypical about it at the time, because that's the way it was. And most of those guys who grew up, who were my parents' age, they worked someplace, but they all kept farm. And when they come in from work, they didn't sit down, they just speeded up every year. They had to work hard. The area was also steeped in music where I grew up. I had music coming at me from every direction. So this character I created for this book, Corley Malone, by the way, I stole that name from a guy who lived in one of my grandpa's rental houses. His name was Corley Jones, but I liked that Corley. So that's what I named my character. And Corley Jones is not me. Everybody says this is just you. Well, I'm going to explain that a little bit. It's not me, because Corey was bigger than me. He was better looking than me. He was better with the girls than I was. He was everything I should have been, probably, when I was growing up. But what I did is, in this book, I took that character and I took him through all of the experiences that either me, my brothers, or somebody I knew went through, and used him to go through it. Now, what did they go through? When I grew up and Corey was growing up in rural West Virginia, what did he do? And I take him through a lot of the experiences I had and a lot of experiences I just heard about in that rural area down on the Elk River. And I took him to revival meetings. Everybody went to revival meetings when I was growing up. It was a great experience, revival meetings, where we were religious or not. In the summertime, you could find one almost anywhere in the rural churches. And they were very, very interesting venues. And I enjoyed going to them. I wasn't very religious, but I enjoyed going to them because they had some good singing, always. Congregation singing was outstanding in those old churches, probably because all those old Scotch-Irish genes running through those people. But sing those old hymns, 4-part harmony, to knock your socks off, you know. And my family and the surrounding area where I grew up took that seriously. They would come down on my mom's porch before the revival started, and they'd work out that 4-part harmony, so when they went to church, they'd knock their socks off when they sang. And I got to tell you one story about the book, and this is me. This happened to me, and I got Corey in here, but this is one of the things. In one of those old revival meetings at a place called the Barren Creek Methodist Church, you know, you have all the preacher, and the preacher preaches the sermon, everybody's singing. Then at the end, they have the altar call. Some of you have been there. Some of you have been to those old churches where they have the altar call. And everybody sings hymns and they all pray. And then they try to convert as many people as they can in the audience. And what we call the back row sinners back there, Samples clan and relatives, we would sing in the back, and we loved to sing those old hymns, Just As I Am, Why Not Tonight, whatever, we sang them all. But they'd come back and try to physically pull you to the altar. So a lot of times we'd try to sneak off before the altar call. But one night we was having such a good time, we just stuck with it. And we were back there singing, and here comes the preacher. I even tell you his name was Irving Fisher. Very charismatic man, good singer. Come back and grabbed my brother by the hand, not me. And he said, "Do you boys believe what you're singing?" He said, "Well, I guess so." He said, "Well, if you believe it, you'll come forward and give your life to God." And I said, "We're not doing that." And he looked us all over. He said, "If you boys don't believe it, you can just get outside." Threw us out of church right there. Right there in Barren Creek Methodist Church. So I don't blame him much, I guess, but we were an obstacle to his job. So what else did people do in that area? This book will take you through all that, all those experiences. And I want to say this, but for anybody that would read the book, you got to remember it's the 1950s, not 20, 21, or 22. And you know, America has a bad habit of evaluating people in the 1950s by today's standards. That's a common disease, I think, in America right now. But you have these boys, just for example, I've been called on this a couple times. You have these boys running around with guns all over the place, you know, including me, and including Corey Malone and everybody else. And nobody paid any attention to that. I see this guy shaking his head, he knows. I don't know how many boys I went to high school with had a pistol in their car, you know. And sometimes a teacher would come out and look at them. You'd tell them about it. You'd come out and look at your pistol or your rifle or whatever. But I never, ever, in all those years, heard of anybody getting shot anywhere, anything having to do with the school. But things were different. It was a more innocent time. But I had one lady kind of scolded me a little bit for putting a gun in the book. But it's what life was at that time. Can't do anything about that. Now, when I started to write, everybody always said, who was your influences? Who did you like Now, I was not a good student in high school, but I was an avid reader, read all the time, and I read lots of people, and I had 4 older brothers who were much older than me, and my dad was smart enough till he built a bunkhouse and threw us all out of the house. We all stayed in the bunkhouse, but they bought books all the time, most of them Westerns, Louis L'Amour, Luke Short, who's the guy who wrote Rattles of the Purple Sage. His name escaped me, but anyway, I read all those books, and then I discovered Ernest Hemingway, and I loved Ernest Hemingway. His stories about fishing, Big Two-Hearted River, up in Michigan, and all that. I loved those books. And you'll see some of his style in my writing, I'm pretty sure. In fact, I'll read you the opening line, and it's Hemingway if I ever saw, I guess. I didn't think about it when I first wrote it, but then he says, Corley Malone slid the Big John boat into the river, stepped into it, and felt the smooth motion. It felt good. Now that Ernest anywhere or what, that's the kind of stuff he wrote. And I was also very much influenced by a guy who wrote about Navy things, Herman Wouk, W-O-U-K. He wrote The King Mutiny. And one of my brothers had that book. I read it. I loved that book. Even influenced me probably on going into the Navy. But anyway, that's some of the people who influenced me to write. And of course, in the 4 years I was in the Navy, I devoured a bunch of books. Because you have a lot of time with nothing to do. Most places had a pretty good library. Most ships had a pretty good library. So I read all the time. And nothing helped me as much when I come to college from the fact that I had read a lot. It was a very big plus for me. Now, I guess the heaviest book I read, come to think of it, was Moby Dick. Of course, I was in the Navy at the time, and that was a pretty good read for us. But I suppose I should tell you this before I move on to the other books. I suppose I should tell you that I don't make any pretense of being a serious writer. There's no symbolism, no multiple level meanings or anything you hear about in literature class. My stories are just stories. That's what they are. And I wouldn't want anybody to try to read anything into it that's not there, because there's nothing there. Anybody in here ever heard of Mickey Spillane? I could have guessed that right there. Mickey Spillane was a very rich writer in the 40s and 50s. He created a detective named Mike Hammer. And literary critics made all manner of fun of Mickey Spillane. And he just laughed and went to the bank all the time. Sold millions of books worldwide. But Mickey Spillane's books were just stories. That's all they were. Kind of, some of them pretty naughty stories. I remember one of them, the title of it was Kiss Me Hard. That's the kind of stuff he wrote. But very successful. So I wouldn't compare myself to Mickey Spillane, but because I didn't get near as rich as he did. Now, I go back to talking about my publisher a minute. I want to wait a minute. I'm ahead of myself. I've got, when I did Doodlebug, as I said, it sold so well, I kept getting it printed. And then I decided to do a sequel to that book using the same characters, same story, Corley Malone, his girlfriend, the whole thing. So I wrote a second book called Dust on the Fiddle, which sold pretty well also. And in this book, Corley Malone, who was a very minor musician in the first book, in this book, he moves on, becomes a nationally known singer. And then in the last book, I love this cover called Hippies and Holiness. This was the third book in the series, same characters. In this book, he becomes a protest singer and becomes nationally known. But in this book, he comes back home, gets involved in a murder case, and the whole book is about solving that murder case. And again, I'll run them through the hills, go through the whole Appalachian culture thing, and that's in this book also. But I almost forgot to mention those two books. But anyway, my publisher told me, he said, you know what sells, Samples? I said, what? He said, ghost story books. Ghost story books sell better than anything else. He said, do you know any ghost stories? I said, yes, I know all kinds of ghost stories. And so he said, let's put one in print and see what it does. So, I'm not very well organized here, I guess, but don't go away, I'm coming right back. Well, I guess I didn't get up here. Here they are. Here they are. So I did this book right here called Elk River Ghost. Little book, small book. Had been a crazy seller. It had sold and sold, it still sells. And now, when you get a publisher, you get royalty checks instead of selling the books yourself. And I still get royalty checks, and this book was written in 2003 or 4. Still sells all the time. And he was right. People love ghost story books, especially this time of year it'll sell, Halloween time. And it sold so well, he said, do another one. So I did another one called Devil's Tea Tables. And it's just a series of ghost stories. Where did I get them? I heard a lot of them growing up. And I would tell you this, my mother lived to be 99 years old. And I spent the last 4 or 5 years she's alive, I spent a lot of time with her. Stayed with her 2 or 3 days a week. She told me all kinds of stuff and confirmed a lot of stuff I had in these books. But they have been really good sellers, these 2 books have. And there's a book called Telltale Lie Like Bush, is that right? A ghost story book that was written by a lady in Fairmont, I don't know how many years ago. That book still sells, all the time. And anybody in here besides this crowd over here ever heard of Dr. James Gay Jones, who taught at this college? Yeah, he taught history here when I was a student. Probably the best history teacher I ever had. He wrote some ghost story books. They still sell. So the publisher knew what he was talking about. They sell very good. So that was my next move. And the only book I have ever done that didn't do well is right here. It was called Sasebo. Nobody in the room except me knows what that word is, I'm sure. But Sasebo is the name of a town in Japan where I spent 2 years and 4 months during my Navy career. And during that 2 years and 4 months, I had a wonderful time. Me and the rest of the sailors in the 7th Fleet. And some great experiences. So down here at the bottom, all right, I know it says a Mason McCabe novel. So that was my character in the book. And I took him and put him through the paces. And as I said on the back, what this book was meant to do was to say what the life of an enlisted man was like in the Pacific during the Cold War. I was a Cold War sailor. Nobody ever shot at me. They threatened to shoot at you all the time, but nobody ever did. So anyway, this book, I had these visions, if I could get this book in airports and bus stations or whatever, it would sell like crazy because untold thousands of people passed through Sasebo. It was the staging area for the Korean War. 2 of my brothers went through there on their way to Korea. And I thought, boy, if I can get that out, it's going to really sell. Well, what really happened, I didn't have to get it out. That's the main thing. But this is probably the only book that didn't make any money for me. And my wife sitting right there says, this is the best thing I ever wrote. Probably the best love story I ever have put together. You know, have to have a love story, and that's probably my best effort. And I borrowed a little bit from a book called From Here to Eternity in this book, because if you remember that, anybody seen that movie? Burt Lancaster, Frank Sinatra, Deborah Kerr, that was a movie. But anyway, in that movie, an enlisted man has an affair with an officer's wife. So I stole a little bit, put work into this book. But that's the only one I have left. And it says right on there, not for sale, because that's the only one I got. I can get more, but I haven't because it didn't sell that well. And then lately, I have got into historical novels. And find some historical incident that happened in West Virginia, and go in and research it, and instead of writing an essay about it, make it a novel. That's what I did with this one, called 23 Shots. Has anybody in the room read it? Oh, read it, as of course you have. Anyway, just to give you an idea of what it's about, in 1894, anybody in here from Webster County? Probably not. In 1894, there was a massive shootout in a little place called Boggs over on Birch River in Webster County. And 3 guys on one side, 2 guys on the other side, inside a post office, shot it out, face to face. Everybody got hit, 2 of them got killed, but everybody got hit. And it was the biggest shootout as an OK Corral. It really was. And I learned about it. I did not write this book, but this is where I learned about that shootout. This book is called Tale of the Elk, and it was written by, see his name on the bottom, W.E.R. Byrne. He was a lawyer in Charleston back in the early 1900s, and he loved to fish. And he fished the Elk River from where it starts, up Slady Fort, West Virginia, and he fished all the time, all the way to Charleston, and wrote about it. And this book is it is a definitive book about Elk River. And the last time it was published, my publisher published it, and I was honored to write the word on the back of it. But when I read this book, he briefly mentioned that shootout. And I thought, there must be a story there. And there was. So I began to look into it and research it, and I found out all those guys who shot each other were from Wise County, Virginia. And you have to read the book to understand why they were up there. But the guy who was the executive director of West Virginia Humanities Foundation at the time, named Ken Sullivan, and he was from Wise County. And I mentioned this to him, he said, let's go down there, and I'll show you around. So he took me down there, and we went to the Historical Society and looked through it, and we found out all about these guys. And I got a picture of him on the back. His name was Hennon Fleming. Cheryl over there was a Fleming. Hennon Fleming, he and his brother, Calvin Fleming, came up here to get away from moonshine war that was going on down in Wise County. And they had killed some people, both of them. And so these 3 guys came after him, were a posse after him. And they caught him in Boggs, West Virginia. That's why the shootout took place. But this book has also been a really good seller. It's sold a lot of them down in Virginia. And I called it 23 Shots because 23 shots were fired in that building during the shootout. And you also learn in that book a lot about what life was like in Webster County at that time, 1894, 95. I don't think he was any kin to Cheryl, I don't know, but same name. And then my last book, my newest book, is called The Tribulations of Sarah Ann Wade. And it is also a historical novel, because it says, a novel based on the sensational murder trial in Clay in 1905. Sarah Legg shot her husband, killed him. And when I was a young squirt here coming to the folk festival, some lady sung a song called The Ballad of J. Legg on the program right up there in the old auditorium. And I heard it, first time I ever heard it, the last time I ever heard it. But when I left Glenville, went down to Clay in 1995 as an extension agent, next door to me was a prosecuting attorney, a guy named Jeff Davis. And I asked him, I said, Jeff, have you heard about J. Legg murder? He said, I not only have heard about it, I had the transcript of the trial right here in my office, and he gave it to me. So I took that transcript and did some more research. She was a woman shot her husband, and she was being tried for first-degree murder, which would have meant she got hanged if the judge so desired. Now, no woman had ever been hanged in West Virginia, but some woman was hanged in America. You know who it was? Anybody? Very tough.
It was in the Lincoln,
Exactly. What was her name? I can't remember her name.
Dorothy.
Anyway, one of the conspirators that shot Lincoln was hanged in Washington, but very rare occurrence. But I won't tell you what happened because that would ruin the story if you ever read the book. Now, I got one more I want to run through real quickly. This one also says on the front of it, not for sale. And it's called The Dark Hollows of West Virginia. Now, in this book, I tried to get all of the bad stuff I'd ever heard about West Virginia and put it in one book. You know, out of state, we have a bad reputation from a lot of people. Incest, child molestation, beating up your wife, all that kind of stuff. That's, people kind of relate that to West Virginia. I thought, well, I'm going to make those people happy. I'm going to write about it. And you know what helped? You just heard me say, I was next door to the prosecuting attorney, and right out in front of my office, I heard lawyers trying to plea and keep somebody out of jail. Somebody had beat his wife half to death. She come in and swore out a warrant for him. And then when they got down to it, she would plead and let him off. 3 weeks later, he'd beat her up again. And I heard that stuff all the time I was there. And this one family was in there 3 or 4 times for molesting their own children. Heard all kind of bad stuff. I got out of my ivory tower here at Glenville, and I found out what life was about some places. But that's what this book was. And the publisher didn't want to publish it. He said, I just don't think that's you. I don't think you should publish it. But he finally did, ordered 2,000 copies of it, sold them all, and he's in the process of getting it reprinted right now, he told me the other day. But it's a nasty book. It's not a book a Sunday school teacher would write, probably. But I don't have it right now, that one I have right there. 2 other little things. My dad worked at a Hope natural gas station called Cornwell down near Clendenin, and that's a picture of it right there. And when I was growing up, a very thriving community evolved around that station right there. And of course, it's all gone now. So this is the history of that thing, which nobody is interested in except people who worked there or had family there. But again, I underestimated. I, of course, published this myself, and I had 100 of them printed. 100 of them. And because I figured I wouldn't sell that many. Sold it all, had to order 100 more, and I've sold most of those. And I got orders from California and Oregon and everywhere because it was children and grandchildren of people who worked at that station and had heard about it when the word got out. Anyway, I did that just for me and the family. Now, I have some friends of mine here, Buddy Griffin and David Odell. Most of you know Dr. Odell, and probably most of you heard of Buddy at least. Buddy's a very famous fiddler, and I thought, I'm going to talk about Doodlebug, which I did a little bit, but I should have some sound effects since these guys are here. And I've never done this before, so I don't know what's going to happen here. I've done this. When I first started getting known as a writer, I got invited to all kind of meetings, conferences, Lions clubs, everything else to make presentations, which is where another way I sold a lot of my books. But it's always just me. And I've got to tell you one thing about one book before we leave it. That book I told you about, Sassabo, I was speaking to the West Virginia, what they now call CEOs, used to be extension homemakers, that are under the extension service. All ladies, probably must have been 100, 150 of them, I don't know. So I went through all my books and I talked about this a little bit, but I said, and my wife will verify this, you may not want this book because it's got sailor language in it. I try to write the way people talk. Sailors talk bad. course, everybody talks about it now, but back then it didn't. But anyway, and I said there are some explicit sexual scenes in the book. And you know what happened? Sold everyone on the table. And she will verify that. Sold everyone on the table. That tells you something about those extension homemakers. Anyway, getting back to Corley Malone, as I said, I run him through 3 books, and they've all done very well. But in all those books, there's music. In the first one, Doodlebug, you get first introduced to the music. And Corley Malone would go out and play music with people around him that played fiddles, banjos, whatever, and he would go out and try to learn from them. And I have one particular place called the Kiefer Boys, where he went, 2 brothers, and this is where he went, and they played some of the old fiddle tunes. I'm gonna get these guys to play with me, and I'm gonna play one of those, and then have them play something else. But anyway, I'm gonna give you a lesson in old-time music that would cost you money to learn, but it's absolutely free. Does anybody in this audience, except these people behind me, know how fiddle is tuned, your strings coming across? Anybody know? I don't care if you're at the Pittsburgh Symphony or if you're in Nashville or wherever you are, a fiddle is tuned E-A-D-G across, but the strings are E-A-D-G. And that's the way they are. But the old mountain fiddlers, my mother being one of them, she did what they call cross-tuning the fiddle. Instead of E-A-D-G, she did E-A-E-A, or D-G-D-G. So I've got this fiddle cross-tuned, so it'll sound, buddy, is yours out? No, yours is out. Run across his strings, or John, somebody, so you can hear it. Just run across, run up from the bottom up.
Yeah, broken. Yeah, don't kill the book.
One more time, louder. All right, now listen. This sounds different. And the reason they did it, I suppose, I don't know the reason for sure, because you don't have to note as many as Dutch. Because you got the same thing on these strings as you got on the first 2 when you're noting it. All right? So that's, these 2 guys, let's sit down, guys. Want to sit down?
Sure.
I dropped my note.
You need a
The
book.
reason I sat down because those guys always sit down. No, they never stood up the way. And Corley Malone went to these people's house because they played the old traditional tunes, cross-tune fiddle and all that. And I'm going to play one, just me and Odell, because that's what those boys did, fiddle and banjo. And show you what it sounds like. And show you why they got excited when Corley came, because he was a guitar player. But let's do a little bit of You Piney Mountain. You'll see what a difference it makes. And why these guys were excited when he brought the guitar in. And I played the wrong song, that's all right.
I was gonna say, that was the most shoulder rock
Shoulder
kind
rock,
of You Piney Mountain.
Well, let's do You Piney Mountain. Let's do You Piney. That is old time music before Nashville got a hold of it right there. That was music. And that's not really a dance tune. Dance tunes are a little bit different. And I want to play another tune that those old guys like to play a little bit called Sally Ann. They're very similar, of course. If you read Doodlebug, you will learn that Quarrier was quite a dancer. He loved the square dance, and he got into beer hall square dancing. That's what I said about beer halls. He went to a lot of beer halls. How did I get in beer halls when I was 16, 17 years old? Very simple. I had 4 older brothers who were all in the service during the Korean War. They came home, they ran the beer halls for 6 months, took me with them. So that's where I learned about them. And when I was 17, they all knew me. And when they found out I played music and danced, they was always glad to have me. But now I want Buddy to take that fiddle.
Oh, good, I'm just now getting your guitar in tune.
I'm going to tell you something about Buddy. And of course, Buddy is a very, as I said, nationally known musician, bluegrass, and fiddle and banjo both. But he told me the other evening, I don't guess he minds me telling you this, but he'd been nominated for the National Banjo Hall of Fame. But, and he should be. And he should be. Of course, he's not in yet. He's just nominated. I'm going to try to get the word out, get somebody to vote against him. But yeah, I'll take that, buddy.
You better.
Now, the reason I'm doing this, I want you to see the difference between the fiddle I played and then if you went to square dance, and if you play the fiddle, like these hippies that came in here and learned to play the fiddle, if you play the fiddle, you've heard of a guy named Mike Humphreys. Mike Humphreys was the premier fiddler in West Virginia, down in the Kanawha Valley for years. And I was very blessed. I got to play with him some in a little beer hall called the Three Gables for square dancing. And Mike was a fine guy. Drank too much, as most fiddlers do. Not Buddy.
Nope.
That is, teetotaler, always has been.
Hey, it depends on how you define teetotaler.
You're going to do an A, I guess. I want Buddy to play. This is a square dance tune. If you went to square dance in those old beer halls like I did, this is what you would have heard. And this is, he's going to do Sally Good. All right. That's a good salad, good, maybe not quite as good as Mike Humphreys. But
No.
But let me tell you a little bit about square dance because it's very much a part of the culture where I grew up. And if any of you are, nobody's in here even close to my age, I can see that. But as you can see, I'm in the twilight of my life here. But when I was in the 8th grade, everybody had to take square dancing in the 8th grade. Did anybody else go through that? Okay, I'm sure somebody did. And they had a organ music or something, and a lady that didn't know what she was doing, and I hated that class. Couldn't stand it. But I guess I was 16, I guess, when my brothers took me into this place. I stepped in the door of this big beer hall, bigger than an average roadside beer hall. And Mike Humphreys was playing fiddle, had a banjo, guitar, and a bass fiddle. And I saw those people hit the floor. I was hooked for life. I was hooked for life to square dancing right there. It's the most remarkable thing I ever saw, I guess. And then, since that time, I've become a caller. I never did do that until, actually, until I came back to New York in '73. But anyway, and I guess one of the biggest thrills I've had calling square dances is 4-H dance camp in Jacksonville every spring where they get 400 teenagers come in to learn to dance. And you teach them Friday night, Saturday night. I bring in a band. And that's the only place I've ever been where you see 400 kids, teenagers, some of them not quite teenagers, no drugs, no booze, no nothing, having the best time of their life. Everybody's smiling, laughing, having a good time dancing to that music. It used to stir my heart to watch it, it really did. Now, anybody have a comment or a question about any of this propaganda I put out here? I'd be glad to try to entertain it. I usually don't open for questions. I'm like the president, he doesn't either anymore, so. Anybody have a comment or question? Okay, I would say that if you're aspiring to be a writer, I always like to do this because most of the time there's somebody that comes around after I do a presentation want to know, how do you get a book published? So I'm going to tell you. You can do, if you're a complete unknown, like I was when I did my first one, you're not going to get one published by a publisher. It is not going to happen. Unless you've got an uncle who's a brother to the publisher or something or another. Or you can get a publisher sometimes that will publish, a small-time publisher, publish for a share somewhere or another. I didn't even try to do that. But nowadays, there is another way, which if you're trying to get a book on the market, it's the way to do it. It's called print on demand. You get your book ready to go. You've got to do it all, and you've got to do it all online. And right here is an example of print on demand. I had to do it all, put it together, the whole business on the computer, but they will print however many you want. 10, 5, 20, 500. So you can't lose any money on it, hardly at all. And I got, I think, 50 the first time, maybe 100. Sold those, but then after that, it just kind of dribbled. This book is available on Amazon, as most of my books are now. But the ones I have sold have been mostly people out of state or sometimes out of the country that see it on Amazon. Books gets very good reviews, but it didn't make me rich like I thought it was going to. You got to have some disappointments. But that is a way. Now, I had one more book I was going to show you, and I guess I lost it. It's on the table over here. There it is. This is I just did this for me, because as you will learn, if you become a writer, nobody buys poetry. They just don't do it. And there's a lot of people wasting a lot of money writing poetry books. But I did one. I called it West Virginia Reflections in Poetry and Prose. And I'll tell you what I used to do. When I traveled for Glenville State College on the college day tour, I find myself down in southern West Virginia, up in the northern panhandle, all over the place, sometimes New York City, sometimes Philadelphia. So I'd always go back to my room and I'd write a poem about it. So that's what these are mostly. And then I wrote a column for, 10 years maybe, for Lisa Hayes. Had that little paper that circulated around West Virginia. What was the name of it?
Two-lane living.
Two-lane living. I wrote a column for her for several years, and I put some of those in here. And this is all very West Virginia stuff. It's about kitchen aromas and thin walls and cold nights and all that kind of stuff. But I think some of this poetry is pretty good. I like it. Nobody else will. But I gave people copies of it, and I'd give you one if you wanted. But no, I wouldn't, because that's the only one I brought in. But anyway, as I looked at writers, West Virginia writers, almost all of them wrote a poetry book before they died sometime. What was the guy's name who wrote Sawdust in Your Eyes? And can you help me, John?
I'm thinking about it, but I haven't been able to get it.
Anyway, a guy up in Pocahontas County he wrote about the timber industry up in Pocahontas County, riding logs down the river and all that. And but at the end of his life, he wrote a pretty good book of poetry. Got it done. And one more thing about the Sarah Legg book. I just telling Shelley here, this book got kicked because it came out and I was about ready to do a big promotion when COVID hit. So I didn't have a chance to do anything yet. But this book is also, it's about the woman shooting her husband, but he was a guy who rode logs down the river and sold them in Charleston, log rafts. So there's a lot in here about log rafting on the Elk back in the early 1900s. And I got information on that from a pretty good authority because my grandpa Samples rode those log rafts down the river and sold them in Charleston, so he knew a lot about it. Okay, that concludes my presentation. If anybody has any questions, and if you want to buy a book, we have some. I didn't bring a whole lot, but and you can see them on the table here if you want to look at them. There's a display of all the books. If you want to look through them and read the back cover or whatever. And if you want one, we can sort it out. When I go out like this, I sell everything for $10. It might say $15 on the back, it might say $9.95, but I can't count change very well, so I just count everything for $10. And some of those books are $12.95. It says on the back. That's a retail price, but if you are interested in one, they're all $10. And if anybody wants to ask me a question they wouldn't ask in public, ask me privately. Well, I'll be around here for a little bit. I'll talk to you. Now, I want to thank everybody for coming, especially the president. Appreciate your coming by. And Mr. McKinney, who we honored the other night, and his lovely wife, Cheryl. Good friends of mine when I was here. And also I thank my cohorts in crime over here for playing with me. I appreciate that.